Hi, everyone. Welcome. And we have one more speaker that was added. We have Michael here also from Emerald Packaging. We're glad you're here. So thank you all for coming. I know this is after lunch and all that. So again, thank you. So in plastics, there's not much going on, right? So if we're in plastics recycling, it's all fun and good. And no. Today, though, we really are going to delve into those things that we're hearing just in the marketplace, and then just real world examples of how we're dealing with it, and not just dealing with it, how we're being proactive towards that. So I am very excited to be on this panel with some people I really care about and are really making a difference. So we are going to start with Katy.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. As Cherish mentioned, my name is Katy Ricchi. I work for Resource Recycling Systems, or RRS. We are not the magazine. We are a consultancy in the recycling and sustainability landscape. We help a lot of different corporations, from organizations and collaborative groups to governmental organizations and local communities, in all of their recycling and sustainability needs. My focus today and my specialty is on plastics recycling, and we wanted to talk about the market as it stands. So I think I would be remiss without talking about PET. That has long since been heralded as the most stable recycling market in the U.S. for many years now. But I'm sure, as many of you have heard, there's been a lot of closures of our PET reclaimers domestically. This is a pretty big concern. You can see on the list, there's 4 major reclaimers that have either had full facility closures, or in the case of Evergreen, full bankruptcy. Evergreen actually just declared bankruptcy not 2 months ago. And these closures are representing, by my estimates, over a quarter of the PET reclamation capacity in the U.S. and Canadian mechanical reclaimer space today. This is a pretty big number, and I know it's relatively alarming for some people. And you'll notice too, the reclaimers that we have on this list, it's not just one end market that's hurting either. Evergreen was one of the largest reclaimers of curbside residential PET plastics that was going back into food grade pellet. Alpec, they are still functioning, but they had 2 of their 3 reclamation facilities shut down in the last year here. And their final remaining one is going into their carpet manufacturing facility. So that's a fiber market, and there's also food grade markets that are all hurting due to these issues. So now, why is this happening in the U.S. market? There's a number of different factors that play out here that are contributing to this. One of the major ones is the market disconnect for recycled materials. As we know, this market is not functioning like a normal market would. I can't say, I'm a supplier, I would like more of this material, so I will pay you a ton of money, and I can guarantee that I get that material. And that doesn't work for recycling, because there's a third party in there, which is the consumer. And those market signals will never reach the consumer. A general resident is not going to look at a water bottle and say, this is trading at 23 cents a pound. I have to put this in my recycling bin today, right? Those market signals will never reach them, nor could we make that work, right? We can't even really get the proper educational guidelines out there all the time. So that disconnect has a major impact on the supply that's available in general. And then additionally, we have a disaggregated system. So again, that educational piece I mentioned, a lot of these recycling systems are localized. So maybe some states do have oversights, recommendations, targets, or landfill bans, but largely the education that reaches the consumers is going to be from the individual communities that represent them. This can create a problem, because you might have 2 communities that are right next door. Their material is all going to the same MRF, or material recovery facility. that has the same guidelines, but what they're sending to their communities might be different. And that is just a difference in resources. Some communities have more funding associated with their recycling programs, and things of that nature. So that creates another disconnect on that level. And finally, one of the biggest issues is the level of competition. This is what the PET reclaimers are directly referencing when they're announcing their shutdown. And that is the low cost of virgin material that's on the market, as well as the low cost of imported recycled resin that the domestic commodities just cannot compete with today. So what you're looking at here is we have a supply-demand disconnect on the collection side, and then a supply-demand disconnect on the end material processing side, and then you have the MRFs and reclaimers kind of getting squished in the middle on both sides of that. So what are we doing to improve this? Well, a word I'm sure no one's ever heard before, EPR. One of the key drivers for that's packaging and printed paper EPR, is a need for that to stabilize that funding, and also help the market stabilize as a whole. Again, I'm sure most of you have heard of the national sword. A decade ago, most of our mixed plastics were going over to China. And then when they put the ban on that, because there was high levels of contamination, a lot of MRFs were stuck holding on to this commodity that didn't have domestic market. So we had to build that up over the years. And EPR would help kind of de-risk that situation a little bit and make it a little less risky for the MRFs to add more materials. There's also an increased focus on circularity for EPR, and it's the hope that this will help drive those stagnant recycling rates up in the U.S. There's been some fluctuations by a couple percent, but for the most part, our plastics recycling rates are not moving at a significant pace. So the benefit of this is that this is the supply side policy. So again, that helps push more supply of that recycled material into the market by strengthening the funding and coordination. And that hopes to aim at that disaggregated system that I had talked about, where it can even the playing field and hopefully allow states to have a similar list that all educational materials can draw to and things of that nature. The downside of EPR is that, again, it's just a supply side. So if we don't have the demand to match it, we're looking at imbalancing that system even further. And I just wanted to show a brief map of EPR for the packaging and printed paper. So as many of you know, we have the 7 states that have enacted EPR. We have a couple of states that are working on the needs assessments. So they're evaluating the full system infrastructure and seeing where their recycling markets are today. And we even have quite a bit of movement. In 2026, we're only halfway through April. These bills in the brown were introduced in these 4 months. So there's a lot of movement, and there's some states on here that you might not think would be enacting sustainability policies, but they are. Introducing. So keep this in mind because you can see EPR is being spread out throughout the U.S. Now, this is the supply side. What are we doing on the demand side? One of the main demand side policies is the minimum recycled content mandates. These are aimed at targeting specific packaging and saying your packaging has to have 25% recycled content. And this is to increase that demand, focus on circularity, and hopefully level out that market volatility that we were talking about, because traditionally the recycled resin in the U.S. is competing not only with the low-cost imports of recycled resin, but also the low cost of virgin. So if we can separate the virgin from the recycled and increase the market value of the recycled over the virgin, that can really help as well. Now, if you remember the EPR map, this is our map for the minimum recycled content mandates specific to plastic. There's much less movement here, right? We have a couple of states, Maine, Oregon, California, New Jersey, that align with the EPR. Washington is enacting a mandate, but you can see it's much, much less robust than the EPR that's being enacted. And again, that does put us in danger of destabilizing that system even further by increasing supply without increasing demand at the same time. So how are we moving forward? Well, one of the key ways, if we don't have policy, we have industry collaboration. There's so many groups out there that are working towards solving for these problems, strengthening the recycling value chain as a whole. I have a couple mentioned here, but there are many, many more. These are some that RRS has worked with over the past to help further those goals. The U.S. Flexible Film is a organization that was just formed last year in direct response to California EPR. The goal of that project is simply to subsidize California MRF film bales and sell it to reclaimers in order to increase the amount of film that's recycled out of California. The FPI, Food Service Packaging Institute, they've been around for many years doing a lot of work and research to help grow the recycling and sustainability of food service packaging products, which is often a product that isn't well thought of in the recycling industry. The polycoated paper industry, again, another organization that's working on a very niche packaging product in order to increase recycling sustainability and research on how that product impacts the marketplace. And there's even organizations that are solely focused on specific materials like the Polystyrene Recycling Association, which again is trying to further the recycling of all polystyrene. So there's a lot of organizations that are working to do this on a voluntary effort as opposed to a mandatory effort. So at the end of the day, there really is no single solution. There's no such thing as a magic bullet in recycling. If I had that answer, I would be making a lot more money. But we can all work together to collaborate on a solution. And that solution is a combination of the policy, which is supply and demand evening out, infrastructure, focusing on making sure that we have the infrastructure in place to recover this material that is valuable and can be utilized, and also stabilizing those economic factors together. All right. And then
it's okay. Thank you, Katie. Now we're going to have Kevin Kelly from Emerald Packaging.
So my name's Kevin Kelly. This is Michael Rincon. Michael is our director of ops. He's in charge really of the technical side of film manufacturing, film formulation. I can come here and talk about the soft stuff all day long, but I imagine there's people in the room who might be actually interested in how PCR runs. And you're going to see slides here that I couldn't have possibly put together, and I can't possibly explain. All I know is that Michael makes it work, and given the variability in the product, that makes him a magician. So we're a 63-year-old plastic packaging manufacturer outside of San Francisco, California. So we're in the Bay Area. We're the last of maybe 30 plastic bag manufacturers that used to exist in the Bay Area. So we must be doing something right, or we didn't get the memo. So we're about 100 million in sales, almost entirely in fresh produce. So if you go to the produce section and buy salad in a bag, or baby carrots in a bag, or now potatoes in a bag, that's us. So you'll see me in grocery stores around the state taking apart packaging and getting thrown out of produce sections, because that's how we do our opposition research. We serve just about everybody in the industry. Backwards. I'm going to confess. I flew on Sunday night to Washington, D.C., spent the next day running around Virginia, flew back to San Francisco in one of the stupidest moves of my life, and then flew here last night, all the while binge watching The Pit. So you could imagine where my brain is. It's with Noah Weil somewhere. So we've been active in plastics issues in California for a long time. And one of the advantages of being the last guy standing is that I get to tell the history. And that's why in my family, I'd like to be the last of my generation alive, so I get to tell the stories. The stories are, of course, always partial to my own memory of things. But 20 years ago, the California manufacturers suggested a recycling program to the American Chemistry Council, because back then, they're the ones who really had to go to move anything. They even actually used to, I don't know, control's the wrong word. They used to give a lot of money to Democrats back then. So it was both parties that were sort of influenced by the ACC. We went to them and said, let's get a green dot style program going in California. It was obvious that California was going towards plastics recycling. You already had the California Integrated Waste Management Board publishing reports on plastic, and the handwriting was there. The ACC said, no, that was the end of it, which is why to this day, I hate the ACC. But hopefully nobody from the ACC is here. And if you are, you weren't there probably 20 years ago. At any rate, we've done a lot of work with the Western Growers Association on particularly around SB 54. We helped them write amendments, one of which helped get plastic bags excluded from the law. We've done a lot of lobbying. We've been part of trade delegations. I guess when I say we, I actually mean myself. We were the first associate member of USFFI, and we're a member of the APR. USFFI now has also the largest film manufacturer in the country. A Charter Next Generation as a member. We have our own public policy advisor, which if you're a $100 million company, I would say is pretty uncommon. But if you're a plastics company in California, you probably should have one. So why are we here? We're about 2 years ago. So after 20 years of trying various forms of sustainable packaging, having nothing adopted in the market, we finally threw caution to the wind about 2 or 3 years ago and said, God damn it, I'm going to be retiring. I could drop dead. I'm in my 60s. I want something to happen. And so I decided we would work with food grade PCR and get something into the market. So we decided to give it away. We started working with one of our biggest customers, Andy. Their brand is Andy Boy. It's Diorigo of California. And we incorporated 30% food grade PCR into their package, and then across their entire line. Walmart saw it. They liked it. They wanted it in their potato bags. We upcharged them a bit, but we've continued just to give the stuff away because I think, as everybody here knows, one of the big issues with sustainable packaging, period, is the cost issue. No one wants to pay it. The customer doesn't want to pay it. The retailers don't want to pay it. I mean, Walmart's great line, of course, is we want sustainable packaging and we want it for the same price as the packaging we're currently using. I think that's probably changing at Walmart. It's not changing at a lot of other retailers. So this has been a huge issue that's really, I think, halted the adoption of a lot of sustainable packaging, this cost question. PCR is probably the cheapest option out there. When you look at corn-based plastics and that stuff like that, you're talking 5x, virgin. This is probably anywhere from 3% to 7%, I would say, more than once you've incorporated it into the product, about 30%, about 3 to 7% more than film without it. So it's affordable. It should be pass-onable, but it's just been one of the big hiccups in the program here. And since now that we're crossing into new territory, this is about how it actually runs. And I think that's the button right there.
Got it. So Katy provided some feedback on the current legislative landscape that we're currently dealing with polyester, but it also expands out into polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrenes. Kevin gave us a background on kind of how we got here today and kind of the cost implements, but there's also the actual product itself, which is why I'm here today. If anybody's part of a supply chain, you have a supplier, you have a customer, whether you're actually doing manufacturing or a broker or wherever that may be, you know what the raw materials are, you know what the customer wants, and the customer wants a specific product for their specific application. In modern world post-COVID, people have primary suppliers, secondary suppliers, even maybe tertiary suppliers. Every product has primary applicational requirements. We usually refer to them as critical to quality. You buy raw materials that you know are going to produce a repeatable product. You know what you're going to buy, you know what you're going to get, what you put it through your process or your customers or what they're going to get. That starts to change a little bit when we start buying post-consumer product. And this doesn't mean if it's just post-consumer polyethylene, this could expand into polyesters, it's polypropylenes, polystyrenes. When it's post-consumer, that means a product has met its end-of-use life intention. So it's gone through its entire lifespan to the point of the consumer or its final destination has been recovered. That is not a very clean process. When I mean clean, that can be dirty, little dirt. It could have other garbage thrown into it. And so when you start implementing these outside variables, these contaminants into the process that the material recycling facilities are dealing with, it actually is going to degrade the product, let alone from a chemical perspective, where once you put another heat signature on any sort of polymer, you're degrading that polymer as well. So when we started getting into the post-consumer world, the first thing we did as a sophisticated or mature company, who are the suppliers and what are they offers? Well, as Katy said, there's a lot of people in the reclaim world who are disappearing. And so we had very limited options at the time, and limited options mean limited supply, which means you only have a few types of products to choose from. And when we start looking at the products in the marketplace, we sort of realize we're dealing with, of course, an inferior product compared to virgin. When I say inferior, I mean mechanical properties. So we had to go back and look at our applicational requirements. And that's why you kind of see these normal distribution curves on here of different shapes, because we're now dealing with a product that isn't repeatable. It could change by box. It could change by lot. You can't have that inconsistency in many applications. Even if it's a bag, if it's flexible, if it's rigid, there are still applicational requirements. Doesn't need a seal, doesn't need to be clear, doesn't need to run on automated equipment, doesn't need 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds of product being dropped into it and then that product being dropped onto a conveyor belt being handled by automated equipment. These are the touch points through the system that people don't see, especially us as consumers, when we pick that bag, that tray, that product off the shelf, is the actual manufacturing touch points that go into it. So how did we address that? Well, we went back to our customers and said, what is your actual critical quality? What is a need and what is a want? And from there, we were able to design formulas and contingency formulas, depending on the lot of raw materials we received, to then adjust on the fly. So we had increased testing and then increased scrap rates and increased R&D costs that this man funded over here for a long time. So we eventually got to a point where we have systems in place for each one of those product categories where we can shift our resins or shift our virgin materials, which are usually premium raw materials, to offset the post-consumer content that goes into it. And after couple of years of design and new product development, we're able to keep matching it. And we tell people today, if you're within this process and if you have an automated process versus manual process, there's a different solution for that. It's not a one size fits all like it once was once upon a time. Now, it's great that we have a product that works in the field, but for those of us that also work in the factory, there's some other downfalls as well. When you're dealing with the post-consumer resin, it is lower quality, and as much as these material recycling facilities try to sort and clean their product, it is still not the cleanest product in the world. You end up with contaminants in the form of labels, dissimilar materials, and these show up in your process as contaminants, as gels, as things that your mechanical system cannot filter out, and you end up with a byproduct of, and all of this drives back into the cost, additional downtime, additional scrap rates, additional man hours going towards cleaning equipment and repairing equipment and or shutting down compared to virgin. And all of that takes time. All of it has it. And this is, again, not something that's unique to just polyethylene. This is something that's ubiquitous with all types of reclaim because it's not a very clean source. So some of the trends that we've seen and again goes into pricing and how we handle it. Slower throughput, higher scrap rates, increased downtime. As I'm sure this industry matures, as we all hope it will, either through legislative requirements and or industry cooperation, I'm sure the raw materials will get better. We're still in the infancy of this, so as it matures, hopefully both the economies of scale will bring prices down to make that gap a little bit more palpable, as well as the quality of product will increase over time, so we don't actually have these inefficiencies in our process. We have a fun AI diagram, because what would a presentation be without an AI diagram? We threw in a word generator, said, show me a blown film extruder that with a happy one. There was a negative one too, just to kind of see what the prompt would look like, but this looks a little bigger, or better, I should say. But what it comes down to is we need to get to a world where we do have a circular system. There are ways to manage it. There are ways to manage the price, the materials, and if we, with cooperation, with mutual engagement through these organizations that we're all part of, we are definitely on a much better path to get there. There's probably been more movement in the last couple of years than maybe the last 20 years, but I'll let the historian over here touch on that if he. So, cost premiums.
I think that's just goes back to what we were talking about earlier, or what I was talking about earlier. When you look at PE or compostables, PCR is more or less in the 3 to 7% range. Right now, who knows? I think the price of virgin polyethylene has doubled since the beginning of the year and is heading further up. So it actually may catch up with PCR. You never know. But the cost issue has again been one of the holdups the entire time. So we can go to the next slide. This is an example. The funny thing, though, if you put 30% PCR in a film, you start out with a film that maybe is 3 to 7% more expensive. But if you talk about putting it into a head of lettuce, using it to wrap a head of lettuce and sell it in a grocery store at $2, that head of lettuce, the upcharge from the grocery store would be basically less than a penny. So we're arguing over less than a penny to actually get an innovation to the market. And it's one of the problems of capitalism really in the last 20 years is that we've lost this whole sense of price signals, signaling innovation, getting markets to move. The retailers just really want to cap prices. I mean, even right now, with film galloping away, folks are fighting taking increases. It's just become part of the culture. And I think it has stifled innovation. So this whole cost question has to get talked out between the converter, their customer, and the retailer. Because unfortunately, the consumer is out there somewhere, but they're not really involved in the conversation. So it has to be us. I suppose they'd be involved in the conversation if we increase the price of lettuce from $2 to $2 and a penny. But given what we've seen about elasticity of demand during an inflationary period, probably the penny would go down okay with people, especially if they knew they were getting a product that was more earth-friendly. But so my urge to, when I'm in an audience of fellow converters or customers, when I'm talking to retailers, I'm like, this is the question. This is the question on the table. Who's going to pay for it? And if we don't have that conversation, we're never getting anywhere. Or what happens is you end up with state mandates on things that may or may not actually help. So we can go to the next slide. So the road is ahead. One of the problems is that there's so many mandates going in. It's hard to see how food grade PCR is going to, for flexible packaging, is going to be economic with these EPR programs, because the fee, you'd be better off paying the fee than paying the cost differential for using PCR. where the way fees are coming down in Oregon and whatnot. So that's a big issue going forward. I think there hasn't been enough conversation between legislators, regulators, and folks actually using PCR who understand the market so that there's a real conversation about what fee structures would encourage what kind of behavior. Right now, for food grade, the California program, for instance, I would say absolutely discourages its use. So that really does have to get addressed. Because demand is going up, the cost gap continues to widen versus virgin. So that's another issue. Quality is not there yet. And how many suppliers have you been dealing with, say, over the last 2 or 3 years?
Probably somewhere between, I would say 5 domestic and a couple of importers, who have access to, call it, lower cost feedstocks or collection. But by the time you get the transit here, it's still comparable in price. So it's just, and this is America. We have to make money. And there's been several who have gone out of business because it's not just the cost of manufacturing. There's the regulatory compliance, especially if you're making a FDA letter of no objection grade of the product. Then you have monthly, quarterly compliance costs that also exacerbate the final cost of that resin pellet, whatever it may be for.
Waste Management had a facility that was making food grade PCR. They closed it down after about a year or 2.
About 6 months after they bought it.
6 months after. It was probably a rounding error on their income statement. They could have probably just claimed it was research and written it all off in California. Circulus got bought by Dow. They got out of food grade. Evidently, they're coming back a couple of years later, maybe. So there's just been a lot of turnover. We started with Circulus. We did a lot of the research on runnability and whatnot with them. And then suddenly the plug was pulled and we're like, bup. And so we've been having to go out and find people. If anybody knows anybody out there who is working on a food grade product, we're always ears. I think the other interesting issue for PCR is compostable films. There's a lot of interesting work happening out there. They will become competitive at some point, especially with the cost being put on plastic materials by EPR programs. So you just don't know. I mean, it's possible over the next 10, 15 years, and because that's how long it's going to take to scale anything. It's also a piece of the conversation that just gets missed when we're talking inside EPR programs is the difficulty of scaling PCR, the difficulty of scaling compostables. It's not going to happen overnight, but 10 to 15 years from now may well. So it isn't that not straight, but circular thing. Makes it look like it's neat. If it really were being diagrammed right, it would probably be all over the place and look like one of those crazy diagrams done by an Etch-a-Sketch. But eventually it'll get to where it needs to get. There's a beginning and there's an end, and they'll touch each other. I just hope it happens in my lifetime.
Thank you.
That is that.
Thank you all. So, any questions from the audience? Oh, please, if you want to come up to the microphone.
So to reach cost parity soon with like virgin materials, do you think it's going to come from recovery side or the processing side of the plastics?
I think it'll depend on how many wars the United States decides to fight over the next 3 years. But I'll leave that to Michael.
I would say that the demand really needs to be there. We're in an area, or we're in a point in technology where there are recovery methods that can be used. There's cleaning, sorting, collection, repelletizing. We're there technology. We're not there demand. When the demand reaches there, right now people subsidize a lot of their PCR through other products that have higher margins, and they take a loss on it. So once that demand increases and we can hit an economies of scale, that'll definitely drop. oil will probably never be, well, at $150 a barrel is one thing, but if oil does drop, it just makes that price parity so much more difficult.
Did you want to answer, Katy?
Yeah, I mean, you guys.
No, I was just gonna say, and I think that's true for all plastic markets as well too. There's been a little bit of a lack of demand in terms of end markets, and that is the biggest barrier for a lot of these reclaimers. Many of them could expand their processing tomorrow if they had long-term guaranteed end markets.
And I think as we're looking, as our company's a recycler too, it's like you said, the end markets, it's how do these EPR laws going to not affect the responsible end market, but the actual end market? And how does that, work with some of the PCR content laws? And to your point, Kevin, I think the biggest thing is if the fee is less costly than making the change, unfortunately that you're seeing some companies pivot that way versus being willing to make these changes. So that'll be a big thing. Yes, sir. Please.
Could probably just, I mean, we could probably hear.
Oh yeah, probably. If it's
My name is Surendra. I'm from Belgium. I'm in plastic recycling for the last 36 years. We do about 450,000 tons in 36 countries distribution. I was wondering, because of all the regulations, EPR, fees, multiple regulations, how about like in South Africa, every time there's a purchase of virgin materials, the buyer has to pay a fixed amount to a fund and they take care of it. So you forget about all the other infrastructures you have to build in between. But would it work and would it be acceptable to the big companies?
I think, sorry, go ahead.
So the U.S. at the federal level has that today with the U.S. Superfund. Every petrochemical product, including resin pellets, has a fee at the federal level that's supposed to be associated with managing the environmental impact, but it goes into a general fund. So I do think it could work if the funds were appropriated properly, but it happens, we have it today and it's not working.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, it would be the best approach rather than the sort of messy system we have right now, which is state by state by state and with producers reporting. It'd be just easier to, start at the place of original manufacture. You will notice the resin companies and most of these EPR laws escape a bit. And, I'm not quite sure why, because it would be the best place to manage it. Plus, they probably have the capabilities of managing it as well, much better than a $100 million company or a brand with franchises spread around the country or, I think it'd be a neater way to go about it if the money then got spent where it should be.
Lobbyists are strong in the U.S.
That's the point. Thank you.
A single sentence sums it up.
yes. Any other questions?
Hi, Ross Bergman, Circular Action Alliance. Just the 30% PCR, is that PET? Is that polyethylene?
Oh, polyethylene.
Okay, cool. And then there was a bullet on one of the slides about the problems of PCR. It said something about PPAs now being PFAS free. Can you just explain that and what that means?
I mean, fluorinated,
I understand. Well, the PFAS
process, yeah, fluorinated process aids, basically anything that makes things slippery, work very well in an extruder to prevent buildup.
Yeah.
It's in just like your car engine or anything else for cheese on your cheese, not sticking to your cheeseburger paper. So when they've gone to a fluorinated free, it's only probably about 75% as effective. So you have, since you're not coating your die and barrel, you're getting additional buildup at an accelerated rate. An accelerated rate buildup eventually lowers the quality of all the products you're running. So you're going to have to strip down your machine and do a thorough mechanical cleaning on it.
Do you consider that a process chemical, not something that's like introduced to say like inclusive in the packaging?
So
is there like trace, like how do you approach that?
So people like Exxon, Dow, Nova, they all add some degree of process aid to it. Most of these major companies are switching from a non-fluorinated.
Yeah.
You used to be able to buy in the secondary market or the additive market a fluorinated option to improve or add back as necessary. For us and with the food packaging and with the regulatory landscape going and saying anti-PFAS regardless of the thousand that exists, we've switched to a non-fluorinated one. So we don't intentionally add it. We don't expect it to be there,
Right.
But it also doesn't have the same performance on our.
Right. That's on to kick Cherish as the recycler. This is something that's really introduced in the conversion stage. Typically, like in the recycling process, you wouldn't see something like this, especially with like a food grade pellet.
Well, and that's something actually ReMA has been really working on too as a group to talk about that passive receiver as a recycler. Because of course, as you mentioned, we are a manufacturer as well. And so we've moved away from those types, the PFAS. But there's still materials out there that may have them.
Sure.
And so, yes, but particular on the food grade where we have that is very specific, exactly where it came from. And as you know, and all that, he had helped with RMS with SBC. So very, very detailed regulatory.
I was about to say, yeah.
I guess that's a little context.
Normal
to that
question.
I can also explain
he's very good.
a little bit. So like one of the things that we look for when qualifying, call it a PCR supplier, if and when they do pop up, is we ask for them to put out a report on fluorinated content. And there's various labs out there. So you can do fluorine content, and then you can choose a threshold and either non-detectable 100 parts per million.
Yep.
So we'll send things out and say, can you just check for broad spectrum fluorine content? And it's usually non-detectable because you're also putting it as such a small percentage. And even if it's 30% of the overall package, that the fluorine that may exist may be so small depending on what feedstock they were actually using.
Okay. We're building this responsible end market verification, standard and program. And a lot of questions get brought up around this realm. And like to that point, it's like, yes, there may be something in the recyclates you're not responsible for. Intentional addition is a whole separate thing, but it's also just to clarify, it's like, it's really not part of the recycling process. Oh. It's part of the conversion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Now, for that whole passive receiver kind of. Yeah, exactly.
Perfect.
One of the things that should be looked at least in my opinion, for the people who are making the resin, the post-consumer resin pellets, is the addition of antioxidant. Because looking at the slides that are up here, the challenges with the mechanical properties, the challenges with the machine efficiencies is every time you put a heat signature on a polymer, it degrades it. You can add back antioxidant, which acts as a sacrificial anode to mitigate that degradation. And that's something that's not done today because it's an additional cost. So there is a finite number of times a given quantity of polymers can be recycled until it's even usable. Otherwise, it's just going to end up as gels and carbon and either extrude or blow holes or end up in a format of film that doesn't want to be used.
That's got a long discussion ahead of us.
Yeah,
that's really good.
It's a whole, that could be its own presentation. About quality of post-consumer.
Well, and Circular Action Alliance. So you're in the thick of it.
Trying to make it work so the right actions are what's being targeted. So,
Octos anytime.
I wouldn't want your job.
So bad.
It means that night.
Did you want anything?
So actually, you coming up, Ross, is a good question I'd like to ask you all. So it wasn't to be negative, it was just to be forthcoming to say some of these fees, the worry is, or if there's not the end markets. So Katy, as you're working with the collaboration and trying to figure out, okay, we obviously want EPR, the whole idea is to be able to ensure that the materials stay in motion, right? And that they don't just end up in a landfill. So thinking about that question of this fee thing and potentially people going another way or brands going another way, what is your RRS? Where are you all at on that? What do you think would be?
So I do get the kind of disconnect there on whether the fee is a bigger cost prohibitive than just paying that fee and using the virgin material. The other thing to keep in mind for this too is there's also bans that are on the horizon that are of a concern as well. And it's not just a fee where your material may not be able to be sold into a specific state. And at the end of the day, that reclamation market in the US is very cyclical, right? If you want your material to hit a certain recycling rate in order to stay relevant in these EPR states, you need to have the reclamation capacity within the U.S. borders that can take that material, because if all of the reclamation facilities close, how are we going to recycle anything? And it may not go back into your product at the end of the day, but I think it's important to keep in mind that in order to reach those rates, we still need reclamation capacity to a certain degree domestically.
Any thoughts from you all, from your perspective?
No, I think it was said very well. I mean, we need both this. The equipment exists for supply, but we need the demand.
Okay.
Legislation will help some of it, but it won't help all of it.
So as you two have been very experienced with the brands and obviously working with Walmart, and you have illustrated a very successful story, I think that what gets in the weeds, of course, is when people look at, and I'm not going to give specific pricing here, but if you look at a virgin pre this situation overseas and PCR, there was a large discrepancy. And so people had to make choices, right? Right now we're seeing a convergence. And so as a recycler, we're getting a lot of phone calls, right? From people who don't want that material in a normal time. So that can be obviously temporary when that happens. So as you look at it as more of a long-term, not just what's going on right now with the war and that change, you mentioned Walmart. Do you think at all that serves as an example with other retailers? Have you heard them say, wow, you were able to achieve that? How can we? Because you're looking at the full package, whereas a lot of times it just is that resin that's looked at, not the full package. So how are you getting other retailers, or are they considering that?
I don't think our customers have heard from any other retailers yet.
Okay.
We've heard from one other department within Walmart.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's gratifying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, if Walmart starts pulling, and they've got a commitment to using PCR, I'm not sure it's specific anymore, in terms of percentage or how much of their on-shelf product will incorporate it. But there seems to be a commitment there and some willingness to pay for what's a very sophisticated product, because that product has to withstand about 500 pounds of impact force, because it's 10 pounds of potatoes dropping from about 3 feet. So that's a very sophisticated bag. And so when we hear plastic bags, sometimes we just think, oh, this flimsy thing that you have, in your freezer, to protect whatever you're freezing. This is actually pretty serious technology. Mm-hmm. And so they seem to appreciate it. The customer that is buying it, the intermediary, Wada Farms, who's the largest potato packer up in Idaho, they've had no problems with it. We've had no rejections. And we've shoved probably about 300,000 pounds of PCR, which would be about 1 million pounds of film, through their operation in about the last year. We've run about 1.25 million pounds of PCR through our film facility in the last year. So I think we have a lot more experience around the runnability questions than anybody out there right now. So we'd like to see more brands jump on board, more retailers, and hopefully they will over the next year or two.
And that might be a little bit delayed too, because while it is currently, short-term volatility, there's no really telling how long that's going to last, where that's going to go. And I think people are hesitant to make long-term commitments without being able to see the future. And that's part of the reason that some of the legislature was coming into play, is to hopefully stabilize a little of that volatility. But obviously, I don't think it's enough to completely flatten that curve.
I mean, I think we could have a long conversation about resin prices and the impact of the war, but I think it's clear that the next year is going to be nuts in the resin market. There's going to be a lot of volatility. There was a lot of infrastructure destroyed in the Middle East. Iran's entire resin infrastructure is offline. For plastics manufacturers, this is a heck of a mess. And so you're just trying to survive right now, an incredibly volatile market. I don't think there'll be much pickup in the use of PCR over the next 12 months, maybe in the food grade area, simply because of companies being focused on managing their way through the volatility of the virgin market itself. So there's lots of impacts from this war, and that's one of them.
Yeah, there was the first question, thank you, was about price disparity, just not getting into prices, but relative percentage. If virgin is at X, the PCR for non-FDA grade, just general PCR, is still above that a lot of the times, depending on the tier and the quality. And then FDA food packaging, letter of no objection, is even higher on top of that. So you have two tiers of pricing that you're actually competing against depending on the market. So hopefully you guys are doing well right now.
Well, then, as a manufacturer, it's always like,
As a child,
right?
Sometimes too much demand is a curse.
Right. And if you're a manufacturer, you're facing a virgin.
We've been there.
Another day.
Everything's a blip, right? Everything's a blip in this world, I guess. So I have a couple questions before we end, if we don't have any more from the audience. I'm going to start with a question for you both, for ReMA. So we know ReMA is a group that obviously handles paper, metal, and plastic, which is a fabulous thing in the sense that they can't hear, well, you're just plastics, or you're just paper, or you're just metal. So when ReMA goes to advocate, they're looking at it from all perspectives. And so that's a great thing when they're speaking, whether it's state or federal. So as you think about, from your perspective as a manufacturer and thinking about ReMA, a group like that, what would you like to see? What do you need from an association that touches all those points? If you were to, I know we have some ReMA.
I'm going to be absolutely honest. Prior to being asked to be on this panel, I'd never heard of ReMA. I couldn't tell you what ReMA does. I couldn't tell you what ReMA did. I didn't know it was involved with plastics. When we think of plastics, we think of APR. And we think of other trade associations. FPA is finally actually waking from a long slumber. I think Dan Felton is doing a great job there. But I think so. I think it'd be great to have a national advocate other than APR that's got heft. And it's interesting to have it intersect with the paper world too, because obviously, as a plastics manufacturer, we're also starting to experiment more with paper. Paper for produce is sort of an interesting concept. We have a long way to go, but we have created some viable commercial products that are compostable, but recyclable, I think, is going to take several years. We've gone so far to invest in a company that is creating a coating that will control oxygen transmission and moisture transmission, but it's a 3 to 5 year project. So paper has a ways to go, but I think the intersection of the two for packaging is going to become real interesting. So having a major voice that can talk about both as packaging, I think would be, great. It would be an obvious advantage. So I'm not being critical of ReMA. We're all at the infancy of so much here. Talking about plastics markets, we wouldn't have had this conversation with food grade 2 or 3 years ago. So we're just here. So the fact that we're getting introduced is great. Hopefully
I hear
the conversation
you say
continues.
more of awareness of ReMA within the plastic world.
Yes. ReMA should definitely be talking to FPA, and there should be at each other's conferences, maybe on panels, so that we get to know each other better.
Okay. Thank you. And Katy, I know that, of course, your group's been part of ReMA, but is there anything anything you can think of that you would like to see the ReMA team as your group is looking at things? Is there any specific ask from the ReMA group?
Oh, I don't know that I have anything specific in mind. But I think I will echo kind of what Kevin said. I typically stay in the plastics market space. And I do think there has been a little bit of a disconnect there. I think the people that have heard of ReMA thought they were a little bit more focused on steel than, or metals as opposed to plastic. So it's nice to see this growing in this space too.
Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that's great.
We actually came hoping to meet people who were making food grade PCR, but that not here evidently. But I mean, again, 2 years from now, maybe 3 years from now, they will be. So until this conversation starts,
that's right,
doesn't exist. So great.
So the last question we have is, I think it's always good to end on like a positive of what can we look towards that's a positive or that you feel could be a positive moving forward from your perspective? Like a positive, whether that be, I think that this PCR will continue in these bags, to this collaboration with this group, or, whatever group that is, or whatever it may be.
So I've been in the flexible packaging industry for 16 years and worked at a company that helped write one of the first carry out bags, or what the term reusable were. And so that was literally 16, 17 years ago now. But I've seen more movement and actual progress, not just talking points, in the last 3 years, and going towards a lot of conflict and a lot of commotion. But there's been more positive direction in the sustainability and circular world for flexible packaging in the last 3 years than the last 17 years, at least from my perspective, and seeing tangible change as opposed to sitting in meetings. Because I'm sure we've all been to 10 seminars, 30 meetings, a Zoom, a tentative on your calendar, but seeing actual change, buying the products, putting the products in the marketplace, that's literally been the last few years. And that's been a highly positive and motivating, change from, call it 10, 15, 17 years ago for myself.
Yeah, I would echo Michael. I think the last 3 years, and I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I think Ellen MacArthur has been a nice nudge for us. We made a commitment. We're one of the few converters to have made a Ellen MacArthur commitment. One of ours was to be using about 6 to 7 million pounds of PCR by 2025. We were sort of dependent on our customers being willing to jump with us. And again, because of the cost conversation, there was a slow uptake on it. I will confess, when we started working with Circulus, we started putting 5% of their material in all of our products without telling our customers, because A, we wanted to get it into the marketplace, B, we wanted to support Circulus, and C, recycled content, even though it was food grade, was still a new concept. And so people had questions. Was it clean? Was it this? Was it that? So we were doing education at the same time we were threading it in and learning about the ups and downs of actually running it. But we have seen a lot of movement the last 3 years. If you told me I'd be running a paper compostable material lamination, or having conversations, real ones, about design for recycling, what kinds of inks can be used, what kind of ink coverage, I would, if you told me that 5 years ago, that would be what I would be talking about today. Most of the time, I would have said you were crazy. We've jumped so far ahead in 5 years. Now, that's us. We've pushed the conversation. But I think CNG is there. I think Amcor is coming along. I think the big guy, Printpak, is doing some really interesting stuff. And it's partly EPR. It's partly the sense that the consumer wants it. It's partly just inertia finally breaking. So it's an exciting time to be a plastics manufacturer. I guess we just hope, with the rates and the dates, as we call them, that the baby doesn't get strangled in the proverbial whatchamacallit, bassinet. I'm long removed from that stuff, so sorry. So I'm trusting that we'll continue to work on these issues with the regulators and legislators, and we'll find ways forward. That's really what I'm trusting. Otherwise, I would have sold my business 2 years ago when multiples were at 9x and gotten out of this game. Instead, I decided to stay in. We have 250 employees. I didn't want to turn them over to private equity. And I thought there was a lot of opportunity for innovation out there. So hopefully, I bet the family money on it. So hopefully I'm right.
Yeah, and I think just kind of along that same line, you saw my final slide. I think those collaborative efforts and the work that people are doing, that is the silver lining of all this. It does feel a little bit doom and gloom with a lot of people closing down and a lot of strife and a lot of issues with the cost market and the volatility. But again, there are people that are working towards these efforts. I don't think it's too late. I think we can still make real progress. Even though we do have those stagnant recycling rates, there is movement happening. And if we can start to move that needle more and continue on that trajectory, I think that's really important. And it's exciting to see all these different groups coming together, a lot of new ones forming in order to answer these unique issues that are specific, because plastics is not one size fits all. The PET market cannot be handled the same way the film market is. So these groups working together to solve specific problems for individual materials, I think is really helpful, as opposed to just a general plastics as a whole category.
Thank you. And on that, I appreciate your time, and thank you all for your time for attending this session, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
I'll share.